At least 3 weeks.
Right.
No, I ain't riding a bike. Take my son.
I don't know.
Prior to tonight's meeting, we'll have an invocation offered by Commissioner Poole, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Lord, thank you for the many blessings you have bestowed on our community. We are here today to continue deciding for the safety and well-being of our citizens. Guide us in our decisions. All is possible in your name. Amen.
I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Dressler, will you call the roll?
Mr. Poole?
Here.
Mr. Harris?
Present.
Mr. Murray?
Here.
Mr. Brady?
Here.
Ms. Twine? Here. Mr. Waddington?
Here.
We would need a motion for.
We have a motion to excuse Commissioner Meiser.
So moved.
Second.
Been a motion and a second. Discussion. Without objection, that motion will be approved, and hearing no objection, that motion is approved. Commissioners, you have before you the minutes from our meeting of January 27th. What is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Waddington.
I move that we accept the minutes of the January 27th meeting and dispense with the formal reading.
Second.
There have been a motion and a second. Discussion. Without objection, that motion will be approved, and hearing no objection, that motion is approved. First order of business is audience participation on agenda items only. Please step to our beautifully signed podium and tell us your name and address for the record. Share with us your comments, keeping in mind that we do have staff writing down your questions if you have some of them, and we'll attempt to answer those questions when the legislation is brought before us. Mrs. Johnson, welcome.
Sharon Johnson, 1139 5th Street. I have a question on the Jackson Street Pier, or some comments. Looks like we've got another change order coming up here. Just when you think you got the figures all straightened out, they start to scramble again. This is not good, folks. The first thing is you have $182,000 that was scheduled to be taken out of the Chesapeake TIF for that pier project. And now it looks like you're keeping that in there in the TIF, and you're going to have private donations on that. That's a lot of money for private donations. There are no names. I asked for names and amounts for the donors. I wasn't given anything. I'm hoping we're going to get names and amounts, that this is not going to stay anonymous. This is not right, because there's 3 people up here that could have conflict of interest with these donors. So we should know who the donors are before you even vote on this tonight. The legislation is going to be passed, and no one knows who the donors are and the amounts. That's crazy. It's been certified. The finances have been certified for tonight. How do you certify something you don't know where this money's coming from, or even if we have it right now? There's been a mistake in one. I caught a mistake. This $148,693,000 change order for programming and marketing funds from issue 8. There's no fund by that name in issue 8. This fund is Mackenzie's budget, coming from the 10% bed tax. Okay? I caught that error, and that's going to be fixed, I guess, tonight, from what Sally tells me. But that is designated for marketing and programming funding, not for construction, brick and mortar stuff on this, going on with this pier. It's been designated for programming and marketing. I don't know which year this $148,693, if that's 2019 funds or 2020. That's what I want to know. I want to know why we aren't getting the names and the amounts of the donors. Also, I see up here There's like $210,000 coming out of the CDBG fund. It's the revolving loan. I didn't catch that. Maybe that wasn't in there when I saw it, but we decided, and I'm on the committee for CDBG, that $400,000 would be left aside in that money, in that fund, for any loans for development. And now you're dipping into that also. You guys have drained all these funds. Now you're depending on donors and nonprofits to pay for this project. We're flying on the seat of our pants here. Also, I see that the ticket house is costing $200,000. Must be a Taj Mahal ticket office. I can't imagine a ticket office costing $200,000. I asked for cost. The engineering tells me there are no detailed costs on this. Well, what's costing $200,000? He says, well, we just got a total cost. Since when does the city do business like that? I asked for the plans. I did get those. I can understand by the plans why this is costing so much money. There's going to be a patio there, a concession stand. This is crazy. Now we're also getting a figure in for the pavilion. Just for the pavilion alone is costing $981,000 for just a pavilion. I don't understand this, folks. So I need to know why we don't have donors when this is being certified tonight, and whether or not we have this money, and why we're taking $148,000 out of that bed tax money. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Commissioner, staff. Tim Schwanger, 362 Sheffield Way. I have 3 items. I'll be real quick. First of all, item number 3, which is the new lease agreement with Good Time One. My question is, it looks like 2015 to 2017, right around there, the amount's going to be $15,000 a year. My question would be, what was the lease agreement prior to the Jackson Street Pier project beginning? The other item is item number 5. Not to reiterate Mrs. Johnson's concerns, but this is the first time we're seeing where Owen Sound Transportation, which is out of Canada, is contributing $500,000 to the project. And my question would be, is that actually a donation, or are we actually using the lease agreement amount that Owen Sound Transportation pays the city every year for dockage privileges? There's a difference, whether we're using the lease agreement money or if it's actually a donation of additional funds. As Mrs. Johnson said, the ticket building is a 300 square foot building, and we're talking $200,000. The party building, market building, whatever it's going to be called tomorrow, 3,000 square feet, almost $1 million. I'm like her. I just don't get it. Item number 6, which is a purchase of a 2021 ambulance at a cost of $302,000. Legislation states that the EMS funds will purchase the ambulance, but as we all know in the past, instead of using the EMS funds, we've gone out for notes and bonds to purchase that type of equipment. So I want at that time to be clear whether or not we're actually using EMS funds, or are we actually going out for notes and bonds. And finally, item number 10, which is the contract with Barnes Nursery at $123,000 for 384 trees to be planted in publicly owned properties. The definition of that is also public boulevards where we've taken down trees and we have yet to replace those. And this is one of the things we talked about at the last Coffee with Commissioners meetings. It looks like all these trees, 384 of them, are going to be planted in city parks and not in the boulevards, which is part of a GRLI grant that has to do with stormwater runoff. And the concern I shared at the Coffee with Commissioners is in a 700 block of Perry Street, there's a lady that's been waiting 2 years for a replacement tree, and that's probably the norm, not the exception. So in the future, if we can try to find some trees to go back to doing the boulevard work, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schwanger.
Greetings, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners. Tom Lamarca, 206 48th Street. I hate to keep beating the dead horse, but the change orders keep rolling in on the Jackson Street Pier and/or Shoreline Drive. And so on item number 2. Again, the number's been thrown out there, $981,026 on the pavilion. A pavilion, folks. I'm just questioning why it's so high. That's $327 a square foot. And then on the ticket booth office, that's got to be a mighty fine office for $188,994 for 300 to 350 square foot if the change orders are approved tonight. We seem to be bidding projects and then allowing change orders to roll in, kind of like as though they're expected or they're an option to the program. I wish more people, more citizens of this community would come in and voice their concerns, because this really is, I mean, it's out of control. So citizens of Sandusky, please come voice your concerns. The city should not be in the rental business, the real estate business, in my opinion, because we always lose money. If you were building these buildings down there like the pavilion as a private property owner, there's no way in heck you could get a bank loan and say, well, we're building this beautiful pavilion for $1 million, $981,000, but we don't know what it's going to be used for yet. So, I mean, that's just insane. But thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Lamarca.
Catherine Carter, 5309 Columbus Avenue. Talking about the pavilion, back, 3 years ago, this pavilion started out as a closed-in pavilion with 2 bathrooms and garage doors that would open up and make an open air area for the farmers market. Now it's turned into a building that is going to have extra insulation, heating, air conditioning, extra insulated hot water tank for the kitchen, and very large triple pane windows. And I don't know what the justification was for having the pavilion in the first place, but it's no longer a farmer market, it's no longer a pavilion. This is a closed-in building, and this is a lot of money for that. And I think an explanation needs to be made on why this has all gone to such an extreme. I don't understand. This says the original contract with Donnelly's. I'm not sure what the original contract was, because what you voted for at the meeting in front of 50, 75 people is nowhere near what you're asking for now. What you're asking for now is so much different. The plans I have for Jackson Street Pier show festival hookups at the north end, 7 festival hookups. That wasn't in the original plans. That was never talked about in any of the public meetings. Now, is that changed also? Because that obviously is an obsolete plan too. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carter. Anyone else in audience participation on agenda items? If not, we have 2 presentations this evening. We'll begin tonight's meeting with a presentation from the Director of ECADEC, Ms. Abby Bemis. I understand that we're going to get a review on 2019. Ms. Bemis, come to the podium, please.
It's our first meeting at your new. Exciting. Looks great.
Different, isn't it?
It is. Beautiful. Thank you for having us. I'm joined by Sarah Ross, our program manager, who I think many of you have had a chance to work with. We're going to tag team this presentation. We do have technically one new face, so I will do the song and dance about who we are. We are a private nonprofit supporting economic development across Erie County. Of course, as our county seat, a lot of that work occurs in the city of Sandusky, and with the city of Sandusky as a primary partner. We describe ourselves as a public-private partnership. in the sense that our mission, our funding, our direction, a large part of that is coming from the private sector. Approximately 60% of our funding every year to 70%, and then the other portion is coming from our public partners like the City of Sandusky. And that is included on our board makeup. Thank you to Mr. Lasko for his support over the last year in helping set the direction of our organization through our board. You'll see many other corporate partners from the City of Sandusky referenced there as well. What are we all about at Erie County Economic Development Corporation? Connecting people, connecting key partners to drive investment in a community. We believe that investment through private business will ultimately create a better quality of life for all of us as community members, as business people, and employees. So that's primarily where we focus our work, is engagement with the private sector to drive new investment in our community. We're here tonight to talk about our service level agreement results from 2019, a few comments on where we're headed for 2020. Pleased to report across the county another record-breaking year in terms of economic performance. We tracked almost $260 million in capital investment in our community last year. That was nearly 500 jobs created, over 1,500 jobs retained. So we're still feeling the benefits of a really positive economy. People's confidence in what we're doing locally, and I would say in the economy nationally, is very high. And we see that through investment dollars, and we're working to make sure that we continue to encourage that in the years to come. So the buckets in our scope of work with you guys, the first was business expansion and retention and attraction. Again, we're trying to drive investment in our community. So how we view that and our role at ECADEC is making critical connections to support businesses who want to start, stay, and grow in our community. So that can be financial incentives. So we work quite a bit with Mr. Story and Mr. Lasko in marketing the Sandusky's innovative programs to support economic development. But we also work at a strategic level with companies. So you see a picture of Bowling Green State University campus, who of course you all played a major role in that attraction. And now we work with their leadership team to make sure that local businesses are aware of that training asset. So it can look like support to K&K for their major expansion last year, or it can be more strategic engagement with people like BGSU Firelands. There's some statistics referenced for you there. Being a major driver of our economy, you are a major driver of our engagement with the private sector. So we spend a lot of our business calling efforts there. We spend a lot of time in our database management, both from a contact and infrastructure perspective, making sure that we understand what Sandusky has to offer and appropriately market it. One unique thing that we did last year with Mr. Story's help was study 2806 West Monroe Street as a potential investment site for the city. So we actually engaged with a site consulting firm based out of Atlanta to come in and analyze that site, its strengths, its weaknesses, how it might be best positioned. And the report that they furnished for us and the feedback that they gave, both in terms of adding visibility to the site and just good feedback for us to consider moving forward, I found a really valuable process, and we were glad to collaborate with you all on. Sir?
I'd like to report on our small business and entrepreneur support, which is one of the priorities in our partnership with the City of Sandusky. We primarily do this through our RISE program, which is the Regional Incubator for Sustainability and Entrepreneurship. It's an entrepreneur support organization. So last year, again, we broke records. In 2018, we met with 80 companies, or in 80 advising sessions. In 2019, we bumped that up to 90. And that's 49 unique businesses, the majority of those being from the City of Sandusky. We do this through one-on-one advising, technical assistance, and some new formats last year, so workshops dedicated specifically to what they were asking for. Over 200 attendees at our entrepreneur events, and then specific extra support for the marketplace at Cook, not only to the entrepreneurs opening shop in there, but also in partnership with the city promoting that opening day, which was an amazing event. The top industries we see there are the top industries for this kind of downtown development, retail, consumer services, food and beverage, just adding that extra capacity and technical expertise for what we call economic gardening. And then looking ahead to 2020, we hope to play a large role similarly in supporting the Sandusky Food Hall through collective projects, continuing this work, supporting Erie Shores Co-work with some programming through RISE, and then also venturing into entrepreneurship and education.
So speaking of entrepreneurship and education, another area of engagement with us was around human capital. So from our perspective, we're looking at ways to drive talent retention in our region. When you talk to companies in the community, I'm sure many of you spend time doing this, what's their number one barrier to growth? The availability and quality of talent. So workforce. We attend many meetings about it a week, and as an organization, we've been faced with the question of, if we were primarily just focused on job creation, how do we also ensure job access, job preparation, to make sure that our companies are not just creating jobs, but creating jobs that reach the people that need them, and that people are successful in those positions. So we've been doing more and more work around workforce development. Primary accomplishments for 2019, one was engaging with the Firelands Partnership to lead an effort called Firelands Forward, which was a comprehensive workforce development study conducted across both Erie and Huron County, recognizing the regional nature of workforce. So that process engaged nearly 300 stakeholders across the two counties. It was quite the undertaking. Thank you to Mr. Webster for serving on that steering committee. We're really happy with the analysis that was conducted, but what we're more excited about is that there are outlined services to deliver to our community to do an even better job, again, promoting job creation, job access, job equity, and we're going to be engaging in that work in 2020. Other successes in this area throughout the year, when we co-hosted the area's first Young Professionals Week. Thank you, Mr. Harris, for participating in organizing that. So that was done with North Coast Young Professionals, and again, the purpose of that is talent retention. We know that if you're engaged in your community, you're going to be more engaged at work, you're going to be more likely to stay here, and we're all going to be better for it. So that event had a lot of exposure for Sandusky and our community more generally. We engage a lot directly with companies and community partners around understanding what's going on with our labor market and our economy. And we engage a lot with our school systems in making sure that they understand what's going on with our economy and with our labor market. So we help to facilitate the Erie County Business Advisory Council, which actually brings together all of Erie County's school districts, including Sandusky St. Mary's and Sandusky City Schools. So really good cross-sectional participation, and we facilitate events. We have an upcoming teacher boot camp where they will be out in our community, 30 teachers? 25 teachers visiting local employers to understand what do employers need from our youth in the future. And we also do that work with students directly. So our Future Maker Showcase was one primary event for that. But we talked to over 1,000 teachers and students last year, promoting our sense of place and prioritizing retaining our young talent.
Another one of our goals together with the city is kind of promoting our regional identity as a good place to do business. So one of the unique and new things that we did last year was partner with Lake Erie Shores and Islands. So we know that they have the audience, they kind of own the brand for the area. But we also have a unique message to deliver. 1/3 of new residents moving into a city first learned about it from visiting. And you see similar figures as people develop a belief of a place as a good place to do business. They first learn about it from visiting. So we partnered with Shores and Islands for their audience and our message to try to share a new message of not just a good place to vacation and play, but also do business. So we didn't test this, but I'm gonna see if this video will work. If not, we'll move on. But this was our Start, Stay, Grow series, featuring businesses.
The LEAP started in 2016. I had been a flight attendant for 15 years at that point, and friends of ours called me in Columbus and said, "You have no idea, but Sandusky's bicentennial is 2018. I know how much you love your little Segway. Why don't you guys come up and start a business?" And I figured, let's give it a whirl. So we came up, met with the city manager, Eric Wobser, and I will sing Eric's praises all day long. He's an amazing man. I asked Eric, first question, I said, "Are you okay with two gay men coming up and opening a business?" Eric's reply was, "Absolutely. The more diverse we are, the stronger we are." We are live, so I have a microphone. You as a guest would have an earpiece, and we go off and tour. And so I want them to take away how beautiful the city is, how diverse the city is, and welcoming, and great place to raise a family, great place to come and be with your partner or your spouse. It's an amazing town. We're very fortunate. We have a very strong partner, Lake Erie Shores and Islands, who genuinely care about the businesses they're representing. Our friends said to me, "Do you feel like you're on vacation?" I get to sit and watch the bay. We're on tours, we get down by the water, and that experience that I share with people, that's the joy of it. So am I happy that I moved here? Absolutely.
Again, start, stay, grow. Could be related to families. In our case, hoping it's related to businesses, small, medium, or large size. But that's a new partnership, and we're looking forward to see what we can do with that next year. And then our unique position in our organization is our targeted audience. So we engaged very strategically and specifically with the business audience. So we continue to deliver our message through direct campaigns. Traditionally, we've done email marketing campaigns. Last year, we added in a Twitter takeover. And actually, our highest engaged tweet of the year was a picture of Eric on the street with Paul Coe. So that was for In-Demand Jobs Week. But again, we have this targeted audience, over 54,000 direct emails, and our open rate is 11% above the industry average. So we're at 31%. And so these are very specific messages about business performance, business climate here in our area. So we have Lake Erie Shores and Islands audience and our specific audience to deliver this message.
And then lastly, what you saw in our agreement with you was around promoting regional economic development more generally, making sure that we're bringing the right people together, that we have the right resources available to support investment in this community. So just captured some activity related to that here. One, we're fortunate to work with you on a number of committees specific to the city's agenda. But we also participate at a higher level with regional organizations, state organizations, and then take that information back to constituents in Erie County. I highlighted some events and topics that we focused on last year, furnished events about, announcements about. One that I'm particularly excited about for this year is Sarah just recently joined the Minority-Owned Business Assistance Center Board of Directors out of Cleveland, which has been some lacking programming in our community that we've observed over recent years. So we're looking to exploring those services and making sure that people have good access in our community, engaging with a number of our state and federal officials around issues of importance to our community. It was a big year for us in 2019 in that it was a strategic planning year. So those were our 5 strategic priorities in our former strategic plan. We are charting a new direction for 2020 and beyond. I think if you read the draft, you'd see a lot of common themes, but perhaps a doubling down around workforce development efforts and around regional economic development and brand awareness efforts. So you saw some of that work captured in the draft of a 2020 scope of services for Sandusky. If you had any questions about where we're headed, happy to answer those, or I'm sure any member of our board of directors would be captured here. With that, I just want to thank you. It's been a pleasure to work with the commission, as always with staff. We think we have a great partnership and support to one another, and I think the progress of Sandusky is visible every day. So thanks for letting us be a part of it, and thanks for considering ongoing partnership for 2020.
Thank you, Ms. Bemis. Commissioners, questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Waddington.
Thanks for the 2019 update, but my biggest thing, or eye test, is outside of Sandusky, the Delphi plant. Is there anything like incubator type smaller businesses chopping that? Is there any word? It's kind of like sitting there. It's like a tombstone. You drive by it and look at it, and I always wonder, is anything ever going to happen?
Yeah, so that is a priority site for our region for North Central Ohio. It has been a challenge site in terms of size and the type of demand that we see for a full 1.3 million square feet. So what we're seeing a lot more of is interest in pieces and parts of the building, and the building owners do have an active strategy that they're pursuing to have a multi-tenant occupancy for that building in the future. Been pretty encouraged by interest levels, and I'm hopeful to have some things occur in 2020. It was held up for really a number of years around cleanup and actually some negotiations with the former tenant.
Sounds good, thank you.
Additional questions, Commissioner?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Klein?
thank you for the presentation. It was great information. I love the data that you provided. Thank you also for considering minority programming. I had made a note there prior to you getting to that about asking about minority programming, so I look forward to see some additional programming in that area.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Murray?
Ms. Bemis, thank you for the work that you and your teammates do. It's been a great investment for the city of Sandusky and for all of Erie County and the businesses that participate in ECADEC. When we collaborate as a community and when we have these public-private partnerships, we all win. We see it every single time. We're seeing it again here in ECADEC. And so I think that we as a government are and remain interested in all opportunities for collaboration. There were just some more things that were discussed today with Mr. Whoopser about some other areas where we might proceed. And so I think that as long as we all have this mindset, both in the private sector and the public sector, there's really no limit to what this area can achieve. We've been the ones to hold ourselves back. And now we're the ones that are propelling ourselves forward, and I thank you for your efforts to make just that happen.
Thanks.
Ms. Bemis, our city began funding ECADEC, I think seriously funding them back in 2011 when I first had an opportunity to serve on commission. We're certainly a different city now than we were then. We're a better city in so many areas, and I will always feel that our investment in ECADEC has made that difference. You weren't there in the beginning, but you've been there for enough years now that you and your staff are the ones that are really making a difference now. So thanks for your hard work. It's hard to pick out one aspect that you do and say this is more important than the others, but the one that catches my eye and I think catches most community members' eye is the workforce development. We can create all the jobs you want. You can have, pie in the sky dreams about attracting great industry here. But if we don't have workforce development, we shoot ourselves in the foot. So I know that you understand that, and I hope that you'll continue pointing in that direction. Thanks to your staff for the presentation and your hard work this last year.
Appreciate it.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Brewer.
If I might, Commission President, I just wanted to say thank you to Abby and Sarah and the rest of the ECADEC team for their work with staff last year. And I was going to commend two particular initiatives that I witnessed firsthand, one of which is what you mentioned, which was the Workforce Development Initiative. The Firelands Forward group had been talking about that for probably about 2 years, but it had really been just that in the conversation stage, and it was very much when Abby and ECADEC got involved that they really were able to steward that into a real process that led to specific recommendations that are being implemented. And I think that's a lot of the value that ECADEC can provide is in playing that sort of coalescing role that brings those things together. And then the other one I was very impressed, and I know they mentioned this in their presentation with the North Coast Young Professionals Week. I think we've talked about how to bring younger folks together, and Commissioner Twine, I couldn't agree more about making sure that is diverse and that we're doing what we can to do outreach with the minority community. But it really was the first example that I've seen in several years of a really targeted and consistent effort to bring young folks together to talk about what is special about this area. And I really look forward to seeing how that grows over time. So thank you for your partnership.
Thank you, Mr. Webster.
Yes, I would just like to add one further comment. I know in my experience, coming on and planning for the Young Professionals Week, I remember the first comment I had made when we had met at Cameo, matter of fact, was it was rare, and perhaps I had never been invited to come into a group for a planning and felt so welcomed. And I think that's just a testament to not only you both, but the team that you all surround yourselves with, and also, I mean, just the young professionals that we have coming up, and what it is that our goals are as a whole. So I just thought I might add that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next presentation number 2 is on the Landing Park project. We have Michelle Johnson from the Environmental Design Group. Ms. Johnson, the floor is yours.
Good evening. It's been a while, so we wanted to give you an update. We're going to talk a little bit about Sandusky Pathway, which is a separate project than the landing. Commissioner Harris, I know that you're fairly new, so we have a couple of slides making sure that, we're bringing everybody up to speed. The rest of us that are here tonight, I think, are, familiar with the project. The one thing, the name did change. So instead of being referred to as Landing Park, it is now being called The Landing. Just as an FYI. The one thing I will say, though, is that we are done with all the planning and we're in construction document design right now. So all the pretty images that you saw from the planning document are still the same. Unfortunately, the updates that I have for you aren't quite as pretty because we are in design. So we have some snippets of our construction document set that's just a little different looking than what you've been used to from the planning process. So Sandusky Bay Pathway, this goes from end to end, city west to east. There is a portion of the Sandusky Bay Pathway in the landing. So the pathway itself goes through the old airport site. So when we talk about the landing, there is still a portion of the Sandusky Bay Pathway in it. We are currently fully on schedule, which is great. The city is currently reviewing our 30% schematic plan set. We actually have a meeting this Friday with staff to go over all the comments for that. Working on survey, we're well into right-of-way as well as environmental due diligence, and per the schedule, we are on track. Sandusky Bay Pathway alignment, a little confusing on a map just because we have so many different segments that have been bid out as part of separate projects. So, for example, the design build project at Shoreline Drive, that has part of the Sandusky Bay Pathway as part of that reconstruction design build effort. So there are multiple segments throughout the city that look on a map to be disjointed, but obviously when all of these different projects are done, they will all be contiguous and connected, and that's obviously the intent of it. So we have a couple different segments. The orange that you see up on the screen, and this is more for Mr. Harris, that's the landing. The blue segments minus Pipe Creek are what are part of the EDG design contract, and basically everything else in other colors are either existing or being done as a current, design project or design build project. So it all does connect at the end of the day. There's just a couple different design firms doing the different pieces. So Monroe Street, this is a graphic from the plan itself. Again, pretty. This is a construction document set. So we are well on our way. It's 30%. The one thing I will say, if you notice, the blue, the follow the yellow brick road, the blue and the green, we have actually shifted to the north side of the road to reduce a couple of mid-block crossings. And that's something that we went back and forth on in the plan part of it. So that's something we are directly connecting now to Lions Park and then staying on the north side of Monroe to Edgewater, and that way people don't have to cross the street multiple times. Just a sample sheet that I randomly pulled out. Similar to the landing, we have some nodes. We call them nodes. They're small plazas. Basically for areas that are either attraction standpoints of people, we want them to either slow down as a traffic calming measure, or inviting, kind of letting people know that if they're in their cars that, hey, this is a really cool experience. Maybe next time that they're not driving by, that they stop and participate, get on a bike or take a walk and spend their money throughout town. So just like the landing, we do have these types of nodes all the way through Sandusky Bay Pathway. As part of the Sandusky Bay Pathway contract, we actually have our signage and wayfinding plan construction document set running on a quasi-parallel path, so to speak. So this signage and wayfinding package is actually for Sandusky Bay Pathway and the landing. So it will be harmonious, contiguous through both projects. Again, not as pretty. This is taken from actually our 70% plan set. So this is a little ahead of the landing project itself, as well as pretty far ahead of the Sandusky Bay Pathway project, because we want to make sure that these elements are available for all of those other segments that I mentioned, Shoreline Drive, et cetera. The Venice Road project that's occurring, again, a separate contract. We want to make sure that all of these different signage and wayfinding and banner elements are the same throughout. So we're trying to move along as quickly as possible. We are currently working on the 100% design document for this. These are the banners. They've morphed a little bit, but for the most part, they're pretty much the same as you saw as part of the plan. These will be all the way through the city in appropriate placings. We're really trying not to add any new poles. So the big thing is that our signage plan and our banner plan, the banners are being placed on existing poles. So that way we're not adding more pole clutter. The nice thing about this, though, especially in our off seasons, obviously days like today, the little splash of color I think will be helpful. And then we are working on full design and language and copy for all of our interpretive signs, educational signs, kiosks, et cetera. This is just a sample educational sign that we're working through right now. Again, we do have a 70% review meeting on Friday with staff to kind of go over some of those details. The landing project schedule, it's hard to tell for those in the audience, but we are, it doesn't work on a TV screen, sorry. We are right in here. We were a little delayed in submitting our 70% because of permitting issues, but we've actually caught up on that time and are now back ahead of schedule. And we are in the heart of environmental permitting. I have a slide for that coming up, but we have 14 permits that we know are required with a 15th that might be necessary. So we are plugging and chugging and moving very smoothly through that, which is great. We are also right in the heart of right-of-way negotiations. I am proud to say that so far of the 4 parcels that have closed, all 4 of those were donated. Of the 10 parcels that we are just, we have fully negotiated and yet are still just waiting for the signature, so far, knock on wood, every single one of those are planned to be donated. And then we have another 12 that are private property owners that are under negotiation. So, so far, so good. That's obviously a process, but things are going quite well with that. I would say that the donations have been a wonderful, pleasant surprise to be working with. So kudos to the city and the property owners that have just been so cooperative. This is a list of our permits. I don't expect you to follow them. The big hiccup that we had in the design set were turtles, landing turtles. So that became a whole new thing. Luckily, we did not have to submit a change order because we had a couple other permits in the contract that were if authorized, and it turns out we did not need them. So luckily, because these came up, we were able to use those dollars and go in and find turtles. And so our big mitigation for that now, finally, that we just figured out this week, is that we're actually going to require winter construction to make sure that we are avoiding our turtles as much as possible. So onward and upward, and we have a plan for the turtles. So 14 of the 15, there are 7 of them that are remaining. So 7 have been cleared, 7 are left to go. With that 15th, if we cross that federal nexus, we might need the 15th. I can give you all sorts of information on that if you're interested. This is the original plan. Again, Commissioner Harris, there were quite a few segments that we wanted to get over to Erie Metro Parks property, but they're outside of the city of Sandusky. So when you start seeing over in that yellow, just east of the Outdoor Sports Force Center, we start getting out of city of Sandusky limits. So the segments that you're seeing on your map right now are the segments that are fully within the city of Sandusky, the preferred alignment, and the ones that we're currently under contract for design. And that's the one that we've already submitted the 70%. Just so all you know, before we even had our kickoff meeting, the first thing we did was meet with the fire chief and police chief to go over load ratings and emergency access. And so that's how we kind of set the tone for load rating, structure rating, et cetera, to understand, how strong a bridge or a boardwalk needs to be based on emergency response. Super cooperative. It was a wonderful meeting. Again, kudos to staff for being just so wonderful. Great Lakes Coastal, this was a theme that was come up and developed during the planning process. So this was from the plan itself, planning document. This actually is in our construction document set. These are the items. It doesn't look much different for those of you that saw the final plan. We actually spec the items that we said we were going to spec. So assuming that the contractor doesn't ask for changes, whoever gets selected for that, we are developing these plans as closely as possible to what you all saw in, Planning Commission and ultimately City Commission as part of the project, into just material examples, understanding what we're applying in nodes. We're really trying to pay attention to operations and maintenance and durability, especially for the old airport site, knowing how environmentally sensitive that is. The restroom that you see up there is actually a concrete structure, yet we're trying to be as aesthetically pleasing as possible. So we're really looking at that longevity and, just simple things of having drains in the floor of the restroom in case there were to be some weird washout where you can clean out those systems easily. Those are the types of things that we're thinking about, and yet still being as aesthetically pleasing as possible. This is just a sample planting palette. This is more for the landing. We get a little less rustic and natural, and we start moving into the pathway just because it becomes more urban. As you go west of Pipe Creek, it becomes a little bit more refined, a little less of a variety when you get into the more urbanized area, and yet we want to celebrate everything that the landing area has with as many native species. We have a lot of bioretention, so we're using a lot of native plants in bioretention areas to help with our stormwater as much as possible, and then directly flowing from those stormwater areas into our wetlands, which is a huge money saver for us right now, instead of having to retain all that water. So Pipe Creek, this is the bridge. This is looking southeast. Planning view, and this is what it turns into, from a plan and profile, 70%. Again, I promise that looks just like that. The one thing that we are not doing as part of this is that water taxi station is a future phase. So the bridge will be, it's actually nicer looking than that, but that water taxi station that we talked about is a to be determined and is not part of this current design set. It is something that's being worked on kind of separately as an economic development driver, but did not move forward as part of this plan set. The lighthouse and focus node. Our Category 3 wetlands grew exponentially. As we all know, water levels have been rising these past couple years. Our wetlands have been encroaching. So one big thing, this site plan is actually much more complex than it used to be because we lost a lot of upland buildable space. So one thing that's a little bit more expensive, except for I think it's going to be a great feature, is that our restroom is now inside of that lighthouse. It is fully watered and sewered. We were planning on pulling up water and sewer anyways. We just flat out, in order to have the ADA turnaround and the fire truck turnaround, we just flat out did not have enough space, upland, non-wetland, to put a restroom, and it's so far away from any other restroom there that actually the base of the lighthouse is going to have an ADA accessible restroom in it, which helps a little bit on the structure cost, but obviously our structure is substantial, and it should be pretty darn close to what you see in that rendering. We're following it to a T. So with those wetlands, we did have to raise up the lighthouse a little bit, so we then added a plaza, fully ADA accessible. The pier is pretty much what you saw before. However, for permitting, instead of having the stick structure, kind of the stick built that you're seeing along here, it's actually a crib pier. Which helps with fish habitat, and it also helps with wind loading and ice loading. So it almost looks like a really large gabion basket with large rocks in it, and it really helped us from a permitting standpoint because knowing that it is such an impact to put anything in the water, the Army Corps and ODNR and especially Fish and Wildlife were all on board with converting that to a crib pier. So other than that, we are moving at a pretty good pace for both projects and on schedule. Have any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Commissioners, questions or comments for Ms. Johnson?
Through you, Chairman.
Commissioner Hurst.
I have yet to, I was unable to locate whether or not what material is going to be used for the decking, but will that be that of like a composite decking material or?
The decking material itself is going to be fire-treated wood. Yeah, we looked at composite and it just from a cost standpoint. So the nice thing about it though is that composite is actually fairly difficult for ongoing operations and maintenance to replace. So with all the wetlands that we have, our boardwalk systems are actually based on H-piles because we have to go really upwards of 35 to 38 feet deep before we hit any suitable soil or bedrock. So those things will be in there very, stable. And yet, if anything were to happen, a weather event, a weird natural, kind of non-frequent occurrence, it'll be easy for operations and maintenance crews to go in and replace that decking. It's like the decking that you'd have in your backyard almost.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you, appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Poole.
yeah, how high is this bridge going across Pipe Creek?
The bridge going across Pipe Creek, I want to say it's it's either 90 or 100.
The width or the clearance?
Oh, the clearance, I'm sorry.
You can go both.
The width is, the span itself, I believe, is at 90 feet, but I can get back to you on that exact number.
That's close.
Ish. And then we are clearing the bottom based on normal water levels, which they have not updated recently, so we're sticking on what was current as of last summer. I believe is a 14-foot clearance. It's pretty shallow over there.
Okay. Is the clearance we're doing based on what's current water, is that like the minimum you can go in height, or
No,
do we have some space for, I'm not sure what's required.
Well, we cleared our bridge permit for that area. So from the requirement standpoint, it's based on dredging back there. So we don't see a lot of larger boats back there, but 13 feet high is a fairly substantial. The bigger thing is that from a large sailboat standpoint, that obviously is, not an intuitive mix, but the sailboats obviously with the non-dredging have a tough time getting back there. From what we talked to from the Coast Guard, we are double what they think that we need.
That's all right.
But we're not sure on those water levels. So it's a prefab structure, so that span itself is not what matters, it's how high we put it.
Okay, just one last concern. My only concern about restrooms is the standard one that it be clean and not and airy and not smell like most of the restrooms public often do. In terms of your design, it's nice that it's concrete and you think easily hosed. I don't think we have a lot of people available for washing down toilets, so
We actually,
appreciate it. It'd be airy and
Yeah.
well lit so
Yes.
that it's useful and after it's built.
And we understand that the city understands that we are adding, obviously, this is a huge investment for the community. And so we've developed a full operations and maintenance plan associated with every single segment. So we've submitted that plan for review. We're actually meeting with staff again on Friday. We have lots of meetings on Friday. Talking about that O&M plan and understanding from a day-to-day maintenance standpoint, what are those items versus maybe from an annual standpoint, what are those items? And then when we start getting into longevity of the boardwalk, you're not going to have major issues for 5, 10, 15 years. So when it does start becoming an ongoing operations and maintenance, what are those items? And then what are the staffing elements that we potentially need for all of the different segments? It's a pretty in-depth spreadsheet that we're working with staff to try to develop. And that way you can plug and chug any sort of hourly rate in there from a sophisticated salaried employee versus, our seasonal summer help that we tend to have from an hourly standpoint, and we're taking it down to that level. So we understand that we're adding things like that, and we're working with the city to make that as efficient as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioners, additional questions or comments? Ms. Johnson, thank you for that informative review on what is truly a transformational project in our city. But, I verbalized this before. My only regret is that these things take so long. I mean, I understand why they take so long. You're dealing with, 15, 20 different permits and state and federal agencies. Good things take time, but I'm short on patience. I hope that, I wish you Godspeed at moving forward, and hopefully we can arrange funding and put the pieces together to make this come to fruition sooner rather than later. Thanks for the presentation.
Thank you.
Next, we have a public hearing regarding an amendment to our zone map. And I believe Greg Volz is going to conduct that hearing for us. This is a public hearing, so at the conclusion of this presentation, I'll invite the public to comment or question Mr. Volz.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is for an amendment to the zone map for parcels located on East Washington. They're 623, 627, 629, and 631 East Washington Street. The applicant, Daniel J. McGookie, is proposing to rezone the properties to expand the adjacent Cove District Transient Overlay District. The underlying zoning will remain residential two-family. The adjacent properties are zoned either R2F or downtown business district, and you'll see that zoning map in the next few slides. The existing use is residential. The proposed zoning amendment does address a few priorities in the bicentennial vision, specifically creating a livable city by enacting policies to stimulate demand and maintain enhanced current supply. Chapter 1113 of the zoning code states that zoning map may be amended periodically when a change occurs in land use, transportation, or other sociological trends, either within or surrounding the community. Lastly, if the applicant desires these properties to be utilized for transient rental, they each would need their own transient rental application and be thoroughly reviewed by the Code Enforcement Department and the Planning Department. Another point to note in regards to when we originally did the transient overlay district is the applicant came to a meeting for that and requested these parcels to be included with their original overlay. But at that time, we were too far along in the process to delay this overlay district and add these parcels as well. So I just want to make note of that. In conclusion, we do recommend approval of the amendment to the zone map for the subject properties. The Bicentennial Vision supports programs and thoughtful zoning changes that encourage hospitality and that increase investment in diverse housing types. As being a major east-west connector, this could help incentivize investment in these houses. Planning Commission has unanimously recommended approval of the zoning change to City Commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Volz. As this is a public hearing, does the public have any comments or questions for staff regarding this change? Mr. Mukoki, welcome.
Good afternoon. May it please the commission, my name is Dan Mukoki. My law office is at 225 Meg Street, which is right around the corner from these houses on Washington Street, which I might add are the first four houses on East Washington Street. I would like to say I appreciate all the support from the planning department and the planning commission, who overwhelmingly or unanimously has supported this zoning amendment. And I would just like to say that it's a continuation of my love affair for the east side of town, particularly Meg Street. When I moved into 225 Meg Street, a little Cape Coddish house, almost 12 years ago now, as my law office, I instantly said that there was a good feeling. I loved it. So I feel that this proposal is consistent, not only with what we want to do and continuing to develop. The way I look at it, folks, is, with the brewery and everything, this is just a start. An old friend of mine, very successful in business, said years ago, you got to crawl before you walk, and that's what we're doing. We're crawling along. We're starting to get up on our feet at the brewery, and just on and on. We intend to keep going. The fact that the city is doing so well, and particularly downtown, is just, it's phenomenal, and it helps me too. It helps us on the east side. We get a lot of that traffic too, that overflow traffic. We have a little more parking down our way. So unless there's some questions, I just wanted to say thank you for all your past support, and I hope to have your support tonight for this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mukoki.
Sharon Johnson, 1139 Fifth Street. I would like to make some comments on this transient rental business going on. I'm concerned because this is creeping. It's getting out of control almost, where we're allowing this expansion, and it keeps going, and it keeps going, and it's creeping into the inner city. I'm also concerned about maybe this transient housing causing a shortage of housing, regular housing for people. And my third concern is that the whole city will eventually be turned in or open to transient rentals. That's my concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Additional comments? Commissioners, comments, questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Murray?
or perhaps you're working with the public still first.
Yeah,
Whatever you suggest.
Mr.
I
Lamarca,
say.
come to the
Very good.
podium.
I'll wait.
Thank you. Tom Lamarca, 206 48th Street. As the city evolves with the transition, everything growing, and the East End has been ignored, but I know that Battery Park's got some things in the back burner. I think it's just continuous with this. I think this is a good move. I think that what the McGookie plans to do is good for that area. So I would support that.
Thank you, Mr. Lamarca. Additional public comments, questions? If not, we will turn to Commissioner Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. McGookie has done a very fine job of cleaning up that little corner. It looks very attractive, and there is business going through there. And I do appreciate your investment. And, that's what it takes to redevelop a city as old as Sandusky. Is we need to have individual homeowners, individual property owners who they make a stake. They put down some markers, and they make an improvement in their corner, their little piece of the world. And we need a city and staff that supports that. We have that today. We have people like you who come and say, I want to invest, this is what I want to do. And instead of the answer being, no, you can't do that, the answer is, well, yeah, let's figure out how we can help you do what you want to do, because that's in the best interest of the city. So I think that these transient districts are appropriate where the property owners and the neighbors have no objection, and they want that to happen. This has been well publicized, and there's no objection to this. And I think anyone who notes the way that you are doing business would not object to that. I think the concerns that this would become citywide are misplaced, because there are a lot of tight restrictions on that. It has to go through the whole notice process and the Planning Commission process and ultimately be approved here. So I want to thank you for what you've done.
Thank you, Mr. Murray.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Poole?
I also agree that Mr. McGookie's project is a good project. I think in general about these overlay requests, that as long as we review each and every one based on what it does and how it improves the neighborhood, that we shouldn't have a problem. I personally, and just my own personal thoughts, this project is a good project for that area. But balancing that, the fact that the neighborhood seems to also support it tells me that it has a good chance of being successful and being positive for the neighborhood. But going forward, just because someone's willing to invest some money in a house that otherwise wasn't taken care of, that's not justification to change the outcomes in a neighborhood going forward. But this, I think, I fully support your project. You've done a good job with all that you've done there, and thank you for that.
Additional questions, comments? If there are no further comments, I'll declare this public hearing closed. Commissioners, you have before you several communications from staff regarding various pieces of legislation. Can I have a motion to accept these communications?
So moved.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second. Without objection, the motion will be approved, and hearing no objection, that motion is approved. Commissioners, we have 3 items on our consent agenda tonight. Are there any of these items that you'd like moved to the regular agenda? None. Ms. Kressler, will you present those items on the consent agenda?
Yes, Mr. President. Item A is the annual subscription to Lexapol for the Sandusky Police Department. Item B is authorization to dispose of property via the internet sales for calendar year 2020. And item C is a change order for the Camp Street demolition project. It is a deduct.
Commissioners, having heard these items on the consent agenda, what is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Toine.
I move to accept the consent agenda items A, B, and C, and declaring that all ordinances and/or resolutions as drafted and presented to the City Commission under the consent agenda shall take effect in accordance with the section reflected in the ordinances and/or resolutions, whether it be in accordance with Section 13 for Section 14 of the city charter, paying particular attention to consent agenda item A, which is a second reading.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second. Discussion. Ms. Cresser, will you poll the commission on the motion?
Did we have a second? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I did a
Mr.
second.
Waddington.
Okay, I'm sorry, I missed her.
I didn't hear it either. Thank you.
Now you can poll the commission on the motion.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Now on the ordinances and resolutions.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Those ordinances and resolutions are passed. Ms. Cresser, will you present item number 1?
Yes, item number 1 is an ordinance amending the official zone map of the city of Sandusky to expand the transient occupancy overlay district to include parcel numbers 56-0177.000, 56-00647.000, 56-01241.000, and 56-00912.000, located at 623, 627, 629, and 631 East Washington Street, and declaring that this ordinance shall take effect under suspension of the rules as contained in and in accordance with Section 13 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Murray.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under suspension of the rules as contained in and in accordance with Section 13 of our city's charter.
Second.
Been a motion and a second. Discussion.
Mr. Chairman, was that A? Did he say?
That is A.
Okay, thank you.
Discussion, Commissioners? Appears we've had our discussion during the public hearing, doesn't it? Ms. Cresser, you poll the commission on the motion.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
That ordinance is passed, and therefore, item B on our agenda will be omitted. Ms. Cresser, will you present item number 2?
Item 2 is an ordinance authorizing and directing the city manager to enter into an agreement with the Erie County Economic Development Corporation for certain economic development and marketing services for calendar year 2020, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Waddington.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and a second. Discussion. Ms. Cresser, will you poll the commission on the motion?
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
That ordinance is passed. Ms. Cresser, present item number 3, please.
Item number 3 is an ordinance authorizing and directing the city manager to enter into a 5-year lease agreement with Lake Erie Island Cruises LLC, also known as the Good Time, for primary use of a portion of the dock facilities located on the Jackson Street Pier, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner
I
Twine.
move for the adoption of this ordinance under the suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and a second. Discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Murray.
I want to applaud Joe Lamb for sticking with this project and with the lease at the Jackson Street Pier. I know last year it was a difficult year for him. I think he'll be up and running this spring. I think access to the water is an integral part of what the city has to offer, and it's important that we support that. So I really appreciate that partnership, and I'm looking forward to seeing a lot of full boats on the water this summer.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Commissioners, additional discussion. I want to echo Commissioner Murray's sentiments. It would be very easy for Mr. Lamb and this city to be confrontational on this issue because there's been a lot of tug of war that's gone on. That has not been the case. Actually, he's turned out to be and I mean this in the kindest of terms, a cheerleader for this city and for that project. And I think that is a statement of cooperation. And I think that's how you get things done, whether you're in business or you're in government. When you can find a middle ground where nobody gets everything that they want and everybody gives up something, then I think everybody wins. And in this case, I believe that the residents of this city wins as does the good time. So thanks for sticking with us.
Mr. Chairman, I believe there were some questions submitted through the public questioning period in reference to agenda item number 3.
And I think, Mr. Lasko, you may be qualified to answer those.
Yes, through you, Mr. President, to Commissioner Twine, and ultimately to the public's questions. Once the initial 5-year term expires under the lease, there'll be a renewal term. Where the rent will escalate back up to a base of $15,500, which is actually the exact rate that it was pre-Jackson Street Pier construction. So there's a discount, obviously, during the initial term, but that lease rate will, again, escalate to where it was pre-construction at $15,500.
Thank you, Mr. Lasko.
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Poole?
Is that an automatic renewal of some sort? Does he have the option to re-sign a new contract that we'll approve, or how's that work?
Through you, Mr. President, to Commissioner Poole, as the lease is currently written, it's a mutually agreed upon renewal term under the lease, so we both have to agree to the renewal. But if so, we've already negotiated the rate of that during the renewal period. So it's mutually agreed upon renewal.
Okay, essentially, just make sure I'm clear, just the rate is agreed upon now.
Correct.
Determining whether it's renewed or not is determined at the time of, after the 5.
Correct.
Okay.
Additional discussion, Commissioners? Mr. Cresser, will you poll the commission on the motion?
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady? Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington? Mr. Poole?
Yes.
And now in the ordinance.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington? Mr. Poole?
Yes.
That ordinance is passed. Mr. Cresser, you present item number 4.
Yes, item 4 is an ordinance authorizing and approving a grant in the amount of $15,000 through the Small Business Assistance Grant Program to Lake Erie Island Cruises LLC in relation to a food and beverage operation at the Ticket House on the Jackson Street Pier, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Twine.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under the suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and a second. Discussion. Mr. Cresser, you poll the commission on the motion, please.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington? Mr. Poole?
Yes.
That ordinance is passed. Ms. Cresser, you present item number 5.
Item number 5 is an ordinance authorizing and directing the city manager to approve the first change order for work being performed by Donley's Incorporated of Cleveland, Ohio, for the Jackson Street Pier Rehabilitation Project in the amount of $178,693, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, go ahead.
Commissioner Waddington.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and a second. Discussion. Mr. Klein, I wonder if you'd give us a brief overview of what we're doing here, and I know that you're slightly under the weather, so I'll ask you to be brief.
To start off, please let me know if you can't hear me. I'm trying hard to talk as loud as I can. but I might have to defer to the city manager in some of these instances as well. All right, so the first thing I wanted to do was, in this first two slides, I want to show that the conceptual plan that was adopted in late 2018 is pretty much what we stuck with as we proceeded with the design of the project through the final design. You can see the boardwalk around the east and west perimeters, the wider boardwalk on the north end of the pier, the parking with the drive down the west side of the pier as well. We have the great lawn and those stairs, the sun stairs that had been getting quite a bit of publicity on social media a few months back when they were originally poured. Still have the picnic area and the trellis swings and all the other things that we talked about, including the landscaping. So on the southern end of the pier, what you're not seeing on here is the end of the boat slip, the south end of the boat slip, which is where the Customs and Border Protection will be. What you do see if you look at the western side of the pier, just north of the turnaround is where the ticket building is. That's something that I'll be focusing on later. And then on the east side of the pier and the southeast side of the pier, you can see the pavilion in that area. The one thing that I did want to point out, if you see the dotted line just north of the pavilion, that was the original location of it. But we did end up moving it south to avoid the floodplain, as we had presented previously during Planning Commission, when it went to Planning Commission. So what I'm actually here to present on tonight is the change order for an additional $178,000. And it's for two items basically, which is the pavilion and the ticket house. This slide shows the east or the west elevation. So if you're standing on the pier and you're looking at it, the top is what the original elevation was supposed to be. That's what was approved in December of 2018 for us to proceed with as far as the pavilion and that enclosed structure. On the bottom is what we currently have. There's a man door that we added for requirements, and then there's a shed, or it's not a shed, it's really our storage area for the building from the external. The size of it is the exact same size. It's still 40 by 80. It's still 25 feet tall. So there's nothing that, no significant changes to that exterior. This is the original three-season building that was awarded. You can see that storage, if you're looking at this to the left, and I apologize on the next slide, it's to the right, but to the left is north. And what you'll see is the storage and the equipment room on the southwest corner, and you'll see the men's and women's restrooms on the southeast corner, and then the open market pavilion hall or the market hall there, with the garage doors on the east-west and then the north and south as well. This one, like I said, is actually flipped in reverse. I debated whether I should actually flip it, but then the words were backwards, and that really bothered me. You can see the restrooms got significantly larger. What happened there is that once we started going through the building permitting process and talking to the building official, we had to make sure that we provided enough capacity and enough space within those restrooms. So we had to add those two toilets in each of them. But if you see on the west side of the hallway across from the restrooms, there's also what is called a powder room on here, but it's really a third unisex restroom that was also required based on the capacity and the seating capacity within the facility. So those were items that were essentially needed to move forward no matter what the design was. On the just to the west of that powder room is the outdoor storage that I referenced with the outdoor with the double doors opening outwards. The hope there, the intent there is that we can use a lot of the maintenance equipment, a lot of the fertilizers and those types of things, and keep them on site for quicker access and quicker maintenance. Just to the south of that is that storage room. That's for internal storage, whether we have chairs, tables, anything like that. And then the one item that we did, the one big item that we did add is that little kitchenette area just to the north of the powder room and the outdoor storage. What happened is, as we were going through the design process, we realized that we had put, and it's that number on the bottom of this slide, we were putting the $830,000 into it regardless, and we started talking to donors, we started talking to other people, and there wasn't a ton of use for the facility in the winter, in those 2, 3, 4 months during the winter. So as we went through the process and looked for a way to expand it, what happens when we did make it a 4-season facility was we needed to add insulation, and we needed to add fire protection, increase the HVAC, and increase the electrical. So that's where those additional costs, that additional $148,000 comes into in the end. The seating capacity is still 96 people indoors. We also have an additional seating capacity because we moved it to the south. One of the things that we are looking at, if you see here, the area that we moved the building to the south, as I had said, that hashed area can now hold a 20 or 40 by 40 tent if somebody wants to expand an event, and that'll hold another 80 people. So those additional restroom facilities really help this pavilion become more accommodating. And as you can see from that north elevation there are the 2 garage doors and then the double doors there that really open it up and allow you to expand into that space to the north. And you'll see the zigzags on the east side of the pavilion. What the zigzag is the overhead light structure, similar to what you see going down Peddler's Alley, something similar to that. So it's more inviting to, hey, here's the walkway, here's the boardwalk, so take a right and head north. What this picture is, moving over to the ticket house, this is also on the south end. You saw it on the west side of the project, just north of the turnaround. Here's the concept that we went through, and you can see that this is hand-drawn, and we had gone through 3 or 4 iterations with the current occupant of that ticket house, and this was what was ultimately decided upon. You can see that the dumpster location is over on the left-hand side at the turnaround. Originally, and you'll see it in future slides, it was on the back side of the building. That was right where the people would be buying tickets and things like that. Plus, it didn't provide real good access by trucks, would have increased the project costs as well. What you can see on the north of the concession area is that seating. It's kind of a semicircle in the public seating area, and the kind of a rectangle west of that semicircle. That area is for the ticketed passengers in case they wanted to get a few concessions before they boarded. They wouldn't have to go back through. If you also look along the western slip, right along the slip, you'll see 2 dashes in a circle. You'll see that line that's 2 dashes in a circle. That is something that was required by the U.S. Coast Guard. That's something that, working with Joe Lamb, it's something that was needed. Those are bollards, those are chains to keep people away from the vessel as it's parked there. So those are some of the things that we had to look at. You can see on the left side, the top is the original, the bottom is the current. We didn't change much. We added an additional window, and we do not have that dumpster enclosure on the left-hand side. On the right is the layout. You'll still see that this is what was awarded on the top. It had a concession area. It also had the ticket office on the south side. What it didn't have, if you notice on the bottom, was an ADA accessible restroom. This is another instance in which we started proceeding through the design, and we were hoping to use the existing restrooms on the south end of the pier as the restrooms for the users here, for the ticket agents and everybody else, but it was determined by the building official that this building could not be an accessory structure. It had to have its own restroom facilities and be ADA compatible. So that threw us into needing to expand the building a little bit. And in talking to Joe Lamb, he also wanted to do a slightly additional expansion. So what the cost increases are for the ticket house are for that ADA accessible restroom, a couple-foot expansion requested by Mr. Lamb, those new bollards and chains that we had to add for the good time for the not Department of Homeland Security, but the U.S. Coast Guard. I got all of my federal agencies mixed up. And then he also wanted to make sure, because we didn't have that mechanical room, which he was going to use as lock storage for money and other things like that, we had to add a storage closet and make the ticket room a little bit smaller. So now the entire facility is ADA accessible, and it allows them to stay on site and stay within the facility and not have to walk to the south end of the pier in the dark by themselves. So the next thing I wanted to point out is that I'm here for this change order, but one of the questions that came up was the Customs and Border Protection Facility. The $500,000 private donation is what we have been calling it. What that is we've been in discussions with Owen Sound, who is the operator of the Pelee Islander for the Ministry of Ontario. So we've been in discussions with Owen Sound, with the Ministry of Ontario, and with everybody else to bring the facility up, as well as Customs and Border Protection, Department of Homeland Security. It's been a wonderful process getting everybody on the same page. We're not done yet, though. We received the 100% plans last week, and we're moving forward with discussions and negotiations with the Ministry of Ontario and Owen Sound. They have been great to work with and have indicated that the $500,000, what we are hoping to do is to roll that into a 5-year lease, but those terms and things are still being negotiated and discussed. So we haven't really finalized any of that. Other things that they're looking for is as everybody's aware, our current Homeland Security facility had a lot left to be desired and was very non-compliant, and we were going to have to do this regardless, no matter what. The federal government was very good in deferring this until it fit our schedule. So there's other things, like we will have to come back for a lease agreement with the Customs and Border Protection folks as well. And that's going to include things like security, monitoring, cleaning, internet service, those types of details. So this is the final breakdown, which was included in the original agenda item. As stated earlier, there was an error under that item that's listed as programming and marketing funds. That issue 8 is an error. But I believe everything else is accounted for properly. I do know, to answer a question from previously, that the CDBG RLF money that was allocated a couple of years ago for this project, or maybe at the beginning, I can't remember if it was 18 or it may have been at the beginning of 2018, but that was allocated and dedicated for the Jackson Street Pier project. And as you can see, that number hasn't changed from the original contract. So when it's all said and done, the additional $178,000 would be broken down from 2019 programming money, so that's unspent funds through 2019, and $15,000 that was approved through the lease with Mr. Lamb, and $15,000 from the approval on the last agenda item for the EDIC appropriation. I don't believe I have anything else. I hope I answered all the questions, but if anybody has any more, I can certainly address them at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Klein. Commissioners, discussion or questions for Mr. Klein?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Murray.
Well, Ms. Poole.
No, go ahead, that's all right.
I wanted to thank Mr. Klein for staying on top of this. This is a complicated project, and frankly, there aren't that many communities our size that have someone of your capacity on staff to be able to shepherd this through. It's really been a great project to see. rolled out and to see it coming close to fruition. I understand that it is a complicated project, and it's understandable that the public gets confused about whether or not there was a concession stand originally and an outdoor patio. You've demonstrated, of course, that was the case. And again, some of these funding sources that we've previously approved, they've been out there. It's been a little while since we've talked about that. It is very complicated. I'm appreciative of the fact that we do have members of the public who come here and ask questions and make sure that we have an opportunity to have these discussions and remind folks of this history from time to time, because we remember it, but we're kind of supposed to do that since we're elected for that purpose, and all of you work on this every single day, and so you remember it. But it's good that we are kept to task, if you will, and we answer these questions publicly. So I'm satisfied that you've addressed the concerns, but again, I am always appreciative of the fact that people come up to the podium and they ask questions. It's a good thing. It's how it ought to be.
Thank you, Mr. Murray.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Poole.
Yeah, I'd just like to explore for a moment. In the information you gave us, you indicated that this decision to go from a 2 to 3 season to a 4-season project, that you had stakeholders and/or staff made that decision at some point. Would you kind of give some understanding, like, first of all, who these stakeholders are, since this is just coming to us now, and what it is the expectation is in terms of the use of this that justifies this kind of money?
Yeah.
Good. Mr. Whoops, are you more prepared to answer that question?
Yeah, I missed the beginning of the question. So
One, who are the stakeholders, one, and then talk about the vision from that conversation with the stakeholders of what you expect the use of this to be. What's going to happen, how many people, it's the idea of, and I'll tell you why, so I'll give you some perspective here. You look at downtown Sandusky, and we have at least 2 locations that have ballrooms in some of the buildings, 2 buildings downtown. Likewise, Amusement Ale is an open facility with plenty of space. I'm trying to figure out what it is makes the stakeholders and whoever believe that adding another footage of a building down there is going to be of any value, and just what your vision is for making this happen, so we can measure at the end of the day that, yes, this was a great idea and it's doing what we expected it to do.
Absolutely. Thank you, Commission President, to Commissioner Poole and others. There was extensive community planning that went into the Jackson Street Pier process, as you know. Those who were engaged in that process included every department in the city, including our recreation department. And one of the things that the recreation department brought up early in the process is that while we do have shelters throughout the facility, we do not have any year-round facilities dedicated to recreation, that the public can host events. And so we'd say that first and foremost, the most important stakeholder in this process was our own recreation department, and their desire to be able to rent out this as a shelter or to do programming on a year-round basis. I remember certain things that came up during that process were things like our chess club, for example, which we hold at Shoreline Park Shelter. This provides them with an opportunity to potentially have a facility where they could do that. Things like class reunions, community meetings, many of those types of things that a city facility could benefit from in a centralized location were important. And then we also did talk to folks about what types of events that private partners could do in the downtown, whether those were nonprofits, et cetera. And they did say that there is a need for a centrally located facility of this type to host those types of events. And so, and then finally, it was looked at as being critically important for us to, in this bicentennial vision plan, to be able to host more winter programming in the downtown. And one of the things that we noticed, and we had a delegation several years ago that went to Duluth, was that they were able to actually do a lot of waterfront programming on the Duluth Harbor, even in the dead of winter in a much colder city, because they did have an indoor-outdoor facility that sort of anchored their Canal Park project. And so this was based on that in many ways. But people who were already doing events downtown were consulted as part of the process. Downtown stakeholders, our own recreation department, our own city staff were the types of stakeholders that gave feedback for that. And again, we do think for the difference between, it was $148,000 roughly, that the flexibility that will bring for us to do year-round programming not only in the city, but to have any, recreation or shelter type facility that can be done year-round and in a covered way was why we made that decision. So.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Additional discussion, Commissioners?
Mr. Chairman, if nobody else speaks, I'm prepared to wait.
Additional discussion, Commissioners? Commissioner Poole.
Yeah, okay. The private donations, I think there was a question about who, first of all, do you have $1.5 million?
Yeah.
That we actually, because I don't think we've received it.
Yeah.
At least not here. And who are the individual, who's giving up this money?
Mr. Webster.
Through the commission president to Commissioner Poole, the private donations or private dollars coming in, because I think there's been a distinction there, and that was one of the questions with Owen Sound, as we talked about the amount of private funds that would be coming into the facility. One portion of that has always been determined to be the lease arrangement with Owen Sound, so that they would put an additional amount on top of the rent that they've been paying to cover a significant portion of the construction as it relates to the customs facility, which is as beneficial, if not more beneficial for them than it is for Sandusky's receiving end of most of that traffic. In addition to that, there's one significant portion that is a bequest that is left to the city on an annual basis from the Mylander Foundation as part of his estate. And the reason that hasn't been publicly brought out is that will be received annually over a period of years, and it is only a portion of that we're dedicating to this piece of it. And then finally, and I'm not able to speak to this yet, there are several other private donors, local institutions that have taken an interest in the Bicentennial Commission, naming the Jackson Street Pier as its legacy project, that are partnering with the Bicentennial Commission. And we really do hope we have to honor those requests and what those grant agreements will ultimately turn out to be. But our goal is that late this winter, early this spring, we'll be able to make a formal announcement that will be very exciting as it relates to private contributions that will get us over the finish line and bring other amenities to the pier in time for its inaugural season.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Additional questions from Commission?
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Poole, you've spoken twice on this issue. That is your limit.
Mr. Chairman, I'm entitled to 5 minutes twice. I've done less than 5 minutes. Because the format by which you do this, the 5 minutes is broken up into little sections. If you want to time it, it would be fine, but the fact is I'm entitled to talk 5 minutes twice.
Mr. Haber, we have a point of order here. Can you tell me, give me some direction?
I mean, it does say 5 minutes twice, so I think I don't have any objection to hearing more, but it does only say twice.
Go ahead, Commissioner Poole.
All right, thank you. And I think this is really a question to clarify for the public about these donations. I understand the people who have not donated money and are planning to later, and this is for the law director through you, sir, may not be public record, but money that we have received, it's public record if they've committed to give us money, correct?
I can speak to this, yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Through the commission president to Commissioner Poole, we've been very transparent about the funds that the city's actually received from Lake Erie Shores and Islands, from Rick and Megan Hography. I'm trying to remember if there are other donations, but as donations have actually come to the city, we have very clearly announced those at the time of their receipt. And so it is only the ones that we have not received specifically that we have not spoken to yet. And again, our only intention with that is to honor the request to announce those in the manner in which our local foundations and corporate institutions have asked that those grants are announced by the city.
Thank you, Mr. Webster.
Mr. Chairman, I think he agreed with me, is that right? And I was looking for Mr. Hayberger, if that's what the law, the way we deal with this, that if we receive the money, it's public record. If we haven't and it is not, is that reasonable?
Correct.
Okay, so he did agree with me. The last thing is, and the reason I bring this up is, you're asking me to vote yes on a contract that represents that we have $1.5 million included in this, and we obviously do not have that. So that's a consideration for me to make in terms of my vote. The last thing I would like to comment on about moving programming marketing funds into this project. I don't support that because I think we have better priorities. When I look around and I have an underfunded program for assistance for down payments for homes when Sandusky is badly in need of filling up the houses in Sandusky, and we move $148,000 to pay for a $200,000 ticket booth. I just find that's not supportable under these circumstances, and that's it. Additionally, yes, this was a complicated project. I recognize that some stakeholders, and essentially the recreation department, I think you could have played chess any place in Sandusky for significantly less money for rec department, including the old city building. It would have been just fine. So we simply have a difference of opinion about how we're spending our money. And so that's where I'm at on this and why I'm going to vote no.
Additional comments, Commissioners?
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Murray.
You know, I've used this analogy before, and I think it's apt to bring this up again tonight. A city is like a household. You don't get to spend all of your money on any one thing. You need to be able to make allocations across a broad set of needs with an eye toward providing for the needs today and for stimulating growth in the years ahead. I think of the investments that we're making on the Jackson Street Pier as, from a family perspective, it's a little bit like paying for college education. They're going to be dividends. They're going to be reaped long after the parents are gone, and for decades and decades into the future. I think that's what we have with the Jackson Street Pier. So I understand there's always going to be a push and pull, and Commissioner Poole is quite right that there are different priorities that we have. But I think that it's important for us to talk about the fact that, you know, as part of the budgeting process, we are constantly making adjustments, trying to figure out the right balance of how to invest in tomorrow to provide for a brighter future for our children and grandchildren, and to make sure that we have the tax revenues tomorrow to pay for the services that we enjoy today. That's critical, because we can spend all of our money on things that provide for services today, but don't provide for an investment that provide for a stable tax basis in the years ahead. So I do support this project for those reasons. I've always respected Mr. Poole's differences of opinion and how it is that he sees that we should better spend our funds. I'm glad we have those discussions here, and appreciate you bringing those up.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Mr. Klein, I want to acknowledge the fact that what we're looking at here is a significant amount. It's $178,000 in a change order, additional work order, whatever you want to call it. It's $178,000, a large amount. But what most people don't see, the general public doesn't see, is the thousands and thousands of dollars that you and your staff and Osborne Engineering have saved us in this process. That number is hard to quantify. It's even more hard to expose to the general public. I see it because I see where you've gone with this project and where the numbers are going, and I'm never thrilled to have to approve $178,000, but it is additional work. It is more value for our dollars. It is not something that we're being scammed out of. Far from that being the truth. It is additional work. So thank you and your staff for your hard work. Mr. Cresser, will you poll the commission on the motion?
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington? Mr. Poole?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
No.
That ordinance is passed. Mr. Cresser, you present item number 6.
Item 6 is an ordinance declaring a 2002 medium-duty Freightliner ambulance, VIN number 1 FVAC WCTX 4HN0N139, as unnecessary and unfit for city use pursuant to Section 25 of the City Charter, authorizing and directing the city manager to enter into an agreement for the purchase of a 2021 medium-duty Freightliner ambulance through the State of Ohio Cooperative Purchasing Program from Horton Emergency Vehicles of Grove City, Ohio, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the City Charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Twine.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under the suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second. Discussion. Who can tell us how we're going to pay for this ambulance?
Through you, sir. The ambulance will be paid through the EMS fund, and it will be paid all cash, which in larger apparatus, we usually use bonds and loans, but in this case, it'll be all cash.
So we have the money and we're going to pay cash.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for that clarification. I think that was the only question regarding that item, was it not? Commissioners, additional questions or comments? Ms. Cresser, you poll the commission on the motion.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington? Mr. Poole?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington? Mr. Poole?
Yes.
That ordinance is passed. Ms. Cresser, I believe we're up to item number 7.
Item number 7 is an ordinance authorizing and directing the city manager to enter into a contract for sale and purchase of real property with Ben B. Bailey, trustee, Mary J. Bailey, trustee, and Mark A. Bailey for a portion of parcel number 60-00662.000 located at 3811 Venice Road for the West Side Utility and Connectivity Improvements Project, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Waddington.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and a second. Discussion. Ms. Cresser, you poll the commission on the motion.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington? Mr. Poole?
And
Yes.
now on the ordinance.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
That ordinance is passed. Ms. Cresser, item number 8.
Item 8 is an ordinance authorizing and directing the city manager to enter into a contract for the sale and purchase of real property with Toft Dairy Incorporated for a portion of parcel number 60-00568.000 located at 3717 Venice Road for the West Side Utility and Connectivity Improvements Project, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Murray.
move for the adoption of this ordinance under suspension of the rules in accordance with Section 14 of our city's charter.
Second.
Been a motion and a second. Discussion. Ms. Cresser, you poll the commission on the motion.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington? Mr. Poole?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington? Mr. Poole?
Yes.
That ordinance is passed. Ms. Cresser, you present item number 9.
Item 9 is an ordinance authorizing and directing the city manager to enter into a contract with D.L. Smith Concrete LLC of Norwalk, Ohio for the Safe Routes to School Sandusky Middle School project, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Twine.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under the suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and a second. Discussion. Mr. Klein, can you share with us a completion time frame for this work that's been asked by a couple of people, maybe even a commissioner, whether this was going to dovetail into the opening of our new schools?
Yes, sir, Mr. President. The completion date is July 21st, 2020.
Great, so we're gonna make it just in the nick of time. Terrific. Additional discussion, commissioners? Ms. Cresser, you poll the commission on the motion.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
That ordinance is passed. Ms. Cresser, the last item, number 10.
Yes, item 10 is an ordinance authorizing and directing the city manager to approve the first change order for work to be performed by Barnes Nursery Incorporated of Huron, Ohio, for the runoff reduction through strategic tree planting project in the amount of $36,697.50, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Twine.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under the suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
There have been a motion and a second. Discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Poole.
just one, is there someplace on our website, list, map, something that people can see where these trees are going to go?
Would be available to answer that question. Mr. Klein?
Through Mr. President, to Commissioner Poole, I do not believe there's anything on there now, but I have a list with me that I can certainly share, and we can get up there tomorrow or later this week.
That's the idea, just so the public has an idea what's coming.
I think there was a question regarding the placement of the trees. Is that you're kind of reiterating that question, Commissioner Poole?
I'm not sure. The idea here is that the public have an idea what kind of tree you're going to put in front of their house, and just a time frame that they can expect it. Whatever we can give is fine.
We have the ability, Mr. Klein, to make that available to the public, do we not, the location of those?
Through you, Mr. President, as we plant trees in the tree lawns, we definitely are talking to the property owners. And to answer the question that did come up earlier, the trees that we're planting, we knew that we had additional money to plant more trees. So we went through and we're going to plant trees at every location that was requested on the current list that I have. I can't guarantee that somebody didn't call a tree in at some point and it didn't make it onto my list, but every tree that we have on my list, and of the 384 trees, I just calculated on my list real quickly, and I could be off by a few. A third of those trees will be going in tree lawns or have already gone into tree lawns throughout the city. The other ones are on city properties, parks, cemetery, things like that.
Thank you, Mr. Klein. Additional discussion, Commissioners? Ms. Cresser, you poll the commission on the motion.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
That ordinance is passed. That concludes our regular agenda, and we'll turn to our city manager for his report.
Thank you, Commission President Brady, Commissioners, audience, and staff. I'll start with donations. First, we want to congratulate Sergeant Tracy Susanna, who won second place at the 10th annual Pete Soto Chili Cook-Off. Pete Soto worked several years for Sandusky PD, transferred to Lorain County's PD, and was injured on duty. For her second place finish, the department was given approximately $5,000 to $6,000 worth of equipment. Ballistic shields, 2 SRT helmets and vests were obtained. We want to thank and congratulate Sergeant Susanna for her efforts and representation of SPD, and we'd ask for a motion to accept those wonderful in-kind donations.
So moved.
Second.
A motion and a second discussion. Without objection, that motion will be approved, and hearing no objection, that motion is approved with our thanks. That is a significant amount of equipment. Thank you.
Thank you. And one more very special donation tonight of $1,912 from Flynn Pye and Cruz for the purchase of a memorial bench in memory of Mel and Mary Stauffer, who obviously did so much for our community. The bench will be installed in Washington Park near the corner of East Washington Street and Wayne Street. And Commission Vice President Murray, I don't know if you wanted to say anything about that, being that those are your in-laws.
Thank you. I would. I'm very appreciative of our friends from Flint Pine Cruz making that donation. We've often been on the other side of the lawyers there over the years, but this is very generous and kind, thoughtful donation they're making. Mary and Mel are interred at Grace Episcopal Church, and it's a wonderful location for that bench because it will be about halfway between Mel's office and where his remains are today, and it's a lovely spot, and I'm very appreciative of that. So thank you, and I would move to approve that. Thank you.
Could I have a motion
Second.
to accept?
So moved.
Been a motion and a second discussion. Without objection, that motion is approved, and hearing no objection, that motion is approved with our thanks, both a significant donation and certainly well-deserved.
Thank you. Moving on to new and old business, starting with the city manager's office. We wanted to let you know that we're applying for the Erie County Community Foundation's Links Internship Program. If awarded, the city will have a paid college intern through the Community Foundation for a period of 10 weeks this summer. I'd ask for a motion to allow us to apply for that program.
So moved.
Motion and a second. Discussion? Without objection, that motion will be approved. Hearing no objection, that motion is approved.
Thank you. Another request for permission from the commission to approve applying to the Whiteman Weber Foundation for weight room equipment for the Sandusky Police. They've had conversations. In fact, a lot of that equipment was donated several years ago, I believe, by Cedar Point. It is now dated, and there have been good conversations with Whiteman Weber. Would like to ask for a motion to apply for those funds.
So move.
Second.
Motion and a second. Discussion? Without objection, that motion will be approved. And hearing no objection, that motion is approved.
Thank you. And moving on to the Finance Department, due to unforeseen circumstances, the city's income tax employee will be out on extended leave. For income tax assistance, residents can contact the Regional Income Tax Agency, or RETA, at 1-800-860-7482, or visit their website at www.ritaohio.com. That is RITAOHIO.com. Tax payments can also be made at the Customer Accounting Office at City Hall, located at 240 Columbus Avenue. Moving on to the Public Works Department. Since the last commission meeting, staff has been putting together a list of the various infrastructure improvements, including streets, sidewalks, safety features, and pedestrian upgrades within the neighborhood surrounding the new primary and intermediate schools and the forthcoming early learning center, as well as outside funding sources leveraged to complete these projects. Once this information is complete, we'll bring it back to commission and share it with the community. In addition to that, there was an emergency equipment purchase at Big Island Waterworks. The city purchased 2 Evoqua water champ mixers in 2012 because BIWW is required by the EPA to keep one operational and one as backup at all times. The mixer was used from 2012 to 2017 until it needed to be rebuilt, and during that time we used the backup. Once a newly rebuilt mixer was put back into service, it lasted only 15 months, and based on the cost of parts and repair, staff has determined that it exceeded its useful life, and rather than rebuild it again, the goal was to purchase new. Big Island is operating without a backup mixer, and it could take 2 months to receive the replacement. The replacement must be the same style and manufacturer for compatibility with existing equipment and is only sold by BISNUS Inc. So staff is looking for a motion to approve this emergency purchase of about $25,000, and will bring appropriate legislation to the next meeting. I'd ask for a motion to approve that emergency purchase.
So moved.
Second.
Been a motion and a second. Discussion? Without objection, the motion will be approved. And hearing no objection, that motion is approved.
Thank you. Moving on to community development, the Erie County Land Reutilization Corporation, otherwise known as the County Land Bank, has fully repaid the city all loan proceeds from the loan agreement entered into 2018. The loan acted as a bridge to allow the land bank to demolish many properties at once while awaiting reimbursement for the Ohio Housing Finance Agency, who administers the Neighborhood Initiative Program. The grant is now closed, with results including $952,000 in total grant expenditures, 61 total properties demolished, totaling 93 residential units, and 53 of the 61 properties demolished by this grant, or 90%, were inside the city of Sandusky. We want to thank the Land Bank for their partnership and successful efforts to eliminate blight in Sandusky and the remainder of Erie County, and to reinvest in our neighborhoods. Also, the next regularly scheduled meeting of our Economic Development Committee will be Tuesday, February 11th, 2020 at 1:30 p.m. in the City Commission chambers. Down to the Planning Department, the city intends to submit an application for a certified local government grant through the State Historic Preservation Office to fund an update to the Sandusky Preservation Design Guidelines. Angie, did we need a motion to apply for that or no?
Why don't, if it's okay, do
one
one
just to be safe. If I could request a motion for that application.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Discussion? Without objection, that motion be approved. And hearing no objection, that motion is approved.
Thank you. Also, the first Consolidated Plan Advisory Committee will be held on Thursday, February 13th at 1 p.m. at the Central Fire Station to discuss the 2020 Annual Action Plan. and then a series of meetings. The Planning Commission will meet on February 26th at 4:30 p.m. in Commission Chambers. Board of Zoning Appeals will meet on Thursday, February 20th at 4:30 p.m. in Commission Chambers. Landmark Commission will meet on February 19th. That's a Wednesday at 4:30 p.m. in the Commission Chambers. And the Arts and Culture Commission will meet Tuesday, February 18th at 5:15 p.m. also in the Commission Chambers. And then finally, this evening, I have two pieces of good news for the Recreation Division. The first is that the Sandusky Recreation Department was notified they were one of 19 organizations across the state to receive funding under the 2020 Boating Safety Education Grants. Out of a total of $250,000 awarded statewide, the city of Sandusky will receive nearly $16,000 to be used to purchase 12 kayaks and a trailer for use in Sandusky Bay, Pipe Creek, Mills Creek, and other locations across the city's waterfront. And I know the commission considered that application process. We're very grateful for your permission to apply, and congrats to Recreation for that. Well, should help with both safety education throughout the city as well as bay access. And then finally, as many of you know, and I think Commissioner Poole had a chance to attend in person last week, the 2020 Oprah Conference was hosted at the Kalahari Resort and Convention Center on Sunday, February 2nd through Wednesday, February 5th. The Sandusky Recreation Department was honored to host 2 education sessions for the newly added Small Agency Forum this year, including collaborating with your community and big events in a small budget. The Rec Department was also recognized with the first place award for the Midtown Supper Club as the best recreation program in the state for 2019 at the Tuesday night awards reception for Ohio Parks and Rec. And to prove it, I have this plaque that was awarded to the city. And again, we're very grateful that Commissioner Poole could be there. It's really a testament to the vision of Superintendent Whirling, as well as Tonda Frisbee, who put a lot of heart and soul into this, and Annette Salat. They make a great team with a lot of partners, including Halo Live. In addition to that, Katie Koropkin of her catering company, Sweet Potato, sorry, and many, many others who helped bring that to life. But it's an example of the creative stuff we're doing with a really great team, not only within the city's Department of Rec, but also with our partners in the community. So we're grateful, and we'll keep trying to push the envelope there. So that concludes my remarks for this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Commissioner, do you have any questions for our city manager?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner
I
Twain.
too want to commend our rec department. They have been doing some wonderful programming, some innovative programming. So again, I just want to congratulate our rec department and the work that they're doing in the community for our young people.
I echo that. It is sometimes an unsung position, but it's critically important in a small city like Sandusky that your rec program encompasses as many things as they do. And I think we can put ours up against many others. You do a lot of things that even I don't see. So I'm pleased and proud of where they've come. Thanks to them. Commissioners, any additional questions for City Manager?
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Poole.
Yeah, we've been very successful and aggressive at taking down blighted homes in the past. We've had a lot of money. What's the future look like funding-wise and the rate at which we're going to be able to continue the good work that they've been doing?
Through the commission president to Commissioner Poole, that's something Director Lasko and I have been talking about quite a bit this last year. And as we look to update our strategic plan, we know now that the current slug of funding that has been made available multiple times through the settlements related to the housing crisis, that is drying up. We know there's really good work going on in Columbus from folks like Jim Rakakis to try to find at least one more slug of funds that would allow the land bank to do its work. But we also don't want to be dependent on that. And the state does provide a local vehicle for how you can provide local resources, and that is a portion of DTAC, or the delinquent tax fund. 5% of those delinquent taxes, when they're paid, can be reallocated through legislation by the Erie County. Ultimately, they have to be initiated by the treasurer, so that those portions can be collected and put into a county land bank. Not only Director Lasko, but our land bank director, Scott Schell, have been meeting with all of the impacted jurisdictions over the past year, including local school districts and municipalities and villages and townships throughout the county. We do think it's imperative that eventually we're able to bring that to Erie County, but we are also looking at, both with our housing program, CDBG dollars, et cetera, how we can keep the momentum going, even in the absence of those funds, now that those grants are completed. Matt is the resident expert on this. I don't know if you want to speak in any addition to that.
Just a few things I would add to Commissioner Poole and the commission. Actually putting the annual report together for 2019 actually came to the realization when the Western Reserve Land Conservancy did a study of Sandusky in 2014, they noted 191 properties that needed to be demolished. as of the end of 2019, based on what's been demolished and what's under contract, we've done 190 of 191. Now, admittedly, they're not all the identical properties. Some have been rehabbed, while others that weren't on the demolition list have been added to the demolition list, but we've done 190 since 2015. We do look to deploy the majority of the resources that have historically been used for demolition to things like exterior home repair, rehab, and new construction. But we are cognizant of the fact that every year we may have 3, 4, 5 properties that need to be demolished that unfortunately backslide, or, for example, catch fire and don't have insurance. So we do want to keep, let's say, about $100,000 a year around for those handful of properties. But candidly, in talking to our code enforcement division, we're currently working on the last batch of properties that are condemned and have demolition orders on them. So for all intents and purposes, we are caught up, so to speak. But again, we know that we may have a few properties that backslide each year that we want to make sure we have a small pot of money for. But we really want to think strategically about investing future resources into new construction and substantial rehab moving forward.
Thank you, Mr. Lesko. I honestly never thought I would ever hear someone in this city talk about working on the last batch of condemned properties. That's a great place to be. I had an opportunity to speak just briefly with Jim Rukakis at the City Club event about a month ago, and he indicating what you had just shared with us, Mr. Webster, he had indicated that there was a possibility of more dollars coming. So that's a good thing. Let's be hopeful we can get that and tear into your last batch, so to speak. No further questions for City Manager. Commissioners will move to any items of old business.
Chairman.
Commissioner Murray.
Maybe just a point of reference for the folks at home. Due to your aversion, your personal aversion to having changing seats, or you call it musical chairs, we have readopted a rule that this commission had for many years, and that is that we rotate who has the first and last vote. So it may have seemed strange that Commissioner Poole was the last one to vote. He wasn't being signaled out. I think next week, the way it works, it was Mr. Harris will be the last person to vote, and then it'll just move around it. And that's because traditionally, the commissions and councils and any bodies like that try to make sure there's a way that one person doesn't have an advantage or disadvantage by always having the first or last vote. So if you did not have that proclivity against the musical chairs, we wouldn't be doing that, but since you do, we are.
I do understand that it can be somewhat unnerving as to who's voting, but it's not nearly as unnerving as your musical chairs would.
I agree.
Any other items of old business?
Don't ask why.
I have an item, and I would like to remind my fellow commissioners that at our next meeting on the 24th of February, I'm going to ask for your selections on the Charter Review Committee, and each of us get 2 selections. So I hope you're prepared to bring those at the next meeting, and perhaps I will ask you to announce them individually and provide us with just a very brief biography of who that person is.
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Murray?
May I ask, there are a lot of great candidates on the list, so that we have some organization instead of having this being, kind of a last-minute thing at the commission meeting. I wonder if I'd be happy to submit my choices in advance so that we don't get here and find out that 3 of us want to appoint one person and then we don't have a second person or a third person lined up. So I would just ask for some consideration to some coordination of that.
I think that's an excellent idea. Commissioner Poole, you had some thoughts on that?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I will not be here next month for the next 2 meetings, and I'd like to appoint Tom Lamarca and Jeff Berquist to that commission. I've already given the information to the clerk, so if you just honor that, it would be great.
Excellent. Commissioner Murray, your suggestion of sharing those prior to our next meeting is a good one. Can we put Clerk Trusser in charge of receiving those, and then we'll sort them out? We can trust her with that?
She's got mine already.
Okay.
I have several
Good.
already.
Excellent. Any other items of old business? Items of new business? It is my responsibility to request a motion to set a public hearing at our next meeting, February 24th, concerning the city's fiscal year 2020 Community Development Block Grant, one-year action plan. Could I have a motion to set that public hearing?
So moved.
Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion. Without objection, that motion be approved. Hearing no objection, that motion is approved. Commissioners, any other items of new business? If there are no items of new business, we will move to audience participation on any item. Ms. Birch, welcome.
Nancy Birch, 105 West Water Street, Unit 2A. My first question is with the construction at the back of our building. They took shrubs out. We had a park bench back there, and they took some shrubs out. And I just wondered, is that landscaping included in the plans that come along in that development on Shoreline Drive?
We'll follow up with you. We can follow up. Yeah.
Mr. Klein is the person responsible for that, and he has your information. He'll get back.
Okay, he'll get back to me. Okay, and then also, just wondered if there was an update on the hole in the ground next to the parking garage. I'm very interested to know whether that's going to progress and someone's thinking about doing something.
That would be the hole in the ground on county property?
It is on county property, but I thought maybe you might have some input on it.
Wish that were true.
Okay, I will email and I'll push it then.
And we will find a way to support that request
Okay.
also.
I thought maybe a big pink sign on it, you know.
The sign idea I like.
Okay, I can do that. I've already talked to somebody who can make one, and we'll put a nice big pink sign up there so that they notice it. I think
we take your suggestion seriously, and someone here will reach out to the
I
county.
think it's a safety issue.
I agree.
I mean, it's been a big hole there. It's been there.
Can't believe it's there.
My oldest son's 42. I think it was there when I moved back to Sandusky. He was 5 months old. So I think it's time that we work on that.
I agree. I agree.
Mr. Chairman, I
Commissioner
have brought the issue up with the county commissioners a few times. So it has been communicated.
Tim Schwanger, 362 Sheffield Way. On the presentation by EDG tonight on the Sandusky Bay Pathway, can I recommend that the next time they're in town and they give the commission an update, maybe you have actually a public meeting before the commission meeting so that the public themselves can ask questions and maybe get updates on that plan, because that plan includes not just the landing, but also all the way through the city of Sandusky. It'd be nice if they would give an update presentation to the community, whether it be, like I said, before this commission meeting or maybe prior to a Bayfront Quarter Committee meeting or something to that effect. It'd be nice to get the public back involved, since we did have, I think, at least 3 public sessions on that entire project. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schwager.
Long tablet.
Catherine Carter, 5309 Columbus Avenue. Last month, there was some things brought that were extras needed on Shoreline Drive that added up to more than $1 million of extra funding. And it was stated that, I thought it was stated, that these extras had not previously been discussed. The copies of Shoreline Drive that I have seem to show that there were plans in mind that are being discussed now, including burying cables, power, and other lines. One thing I thought was odd to add to the issue was having new lines connected to the buildings. I thought he showed pictures of meters and conduit. This is from some of the Shoreline Drive plans that I have, the blueprints and stuff. It says on this paperwork, from page 81 to 85, 5 pages, it's duplicated. Number 4, contractor shall connect all electrical and cable service conduits to meters on buildings. Number 5, contractors to provide 1 4-inch conduit from Ohio Edison mainline vault to service vault, and 1 2-inch conduit from the service vault to the private meter. And number 6, contractor is to install 1 3-inch conduit from the Buckeye cable handhole to the point of connection of private service. That sounds to me like, even if these are debunked plans, this is already in here. What he was showing sounded like that was not any way that they had planned on hooking these buildings up. On number 3, it says Ohio Edison will design and install wiring, AT&T will design and install wiring, Buckeye Cable will design and install wiring, City Fiber Optics will design and install wiring. I don't understand why this was brought up at last month's meeting of something that seemed to have gotten forgotten, to hook the wiring that's in the road on a pole buried. Why this picture showed that there was no plan on connecting them to the buildings and meters when obviously 5 pages straight, it was in there. Thank you. Oh, another thing, sorry. I thought that it was stated that the Bacon Boat Race was going to be the 3rd weekend of September. Is that not the same weekend as Cruising the Bay? I didn't know. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carter.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Murray.
I'm quite confident, given Mr. Klein's competence, that we're not paying for the same thing twice. So I would request that he follow up with Ms. Carter to clear up any discrepancies.
Mark.
Greetings, Mayor. Tom Lamarca, 206 48th Street. Excuse me, I've got the same illness others have. Transparency has kind of been a big word running for the past few months on this council or commission. But I don't think we're really seeing the transparency on the cost of the buildings within the bids. When we're doing buildings with a design build, if we're going to continue to have change orders in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, then I think we need to be having a cap on what that potential design building will be. We need to have real bids. Again, if it was a private enterprise, they certainly wouldn't be huge change orders like we do here in the city of Sandusky. So when we're looking at the new safety building, I hope that when the bids are coming in, that we're working with real-time bidding and not design bidding or design build bidding where we'll say, well, we're going to do that for, pick a number, $5 million. And then as we go along, we're going to have options A, B, and C. Did you want cell doors or did you want glass window panes? I mean, let's get real about the bids. The downtown Shoreline Drive area is going to look beautiful. No doubt in my mind. I'm proud of what things come as it comes together. But the neighborhoods, the paving needs more attention than the present plan. And I've seen Facebook posts from people, potential buyers, about the condition of the streets in an abundance of the neighborhoods. I mean, my neighborhood, one street gets some paving. You get into the Cable Park area, you know, that's a hit and miss deal there as well. And we just have to look at more and find the money to do so. In fact, if we could borrow some of the money that's being spent on the pier or Shoreline Drive, that would help. I wonder if there are any updates on the proposed demolition of the Cook Building, and are there any updates on the Meggs Street city property marketing per se? Because it seems to me we had something out there advertising, looking for potential designers, builders to come in. That's it for now. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. City residents need to come to these meetings and voice their opinion.
Thank you, Mr. Lamarca.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Murray.
If I may, I think it was just last meeting where Mr. Klein announced really a program over the course of the next 10 years. We'll pave every single street in the city, and we'll do it with our existing budget, existing tax base. And it was interesting. I was reading an article over the course of the weekend. We're sitting at one of the absolute lowest income tax rates in the entire state of Ohio. We're at 1.25%. The average across the state is on the order of 2.25% to 2.5%. I'm not sure it's moved upward recently with the local government fund cuts. But the city of Toledo, in order to be able to do the exact same thing that we're talking about doing, is proposing an extension of their current increased income tax of 2.75%. So we are at less than half that rate. We don't need additional monies to pave the streets. It's really great to see what staff is doing. Of course, we're able to do that because we have the benefit of a lodging tax and we have the benefit of an admissions tax. So our income tax rates are much lower. And for that, I think we should also be very grateful. But I just want to address that point that, staff, the commission has hammered, sometimes publicly, mostly privately. We need to get more of these streets done. The staff has been very receptive, and so I'm really pleased with the direction that we have.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. I agree wholeheartedly. I think I've said publicly many times that you spend $1 million or $2 million on streets when you have 120 miles of streets, it's hard to notice. You're not going to notice it perhaps in the first year or two unless you live on one of those streets. But after 4 or 5 years, you ought to start noticing. And after 10, you ought to really notice it. So I'm optimistic that we're going in the right direction. There is one comment that is almost universal among constituents that speak to me, and that is, when are you going to fix my road? When are you going to fix my street? So we hear that as commissioners. Staff hears that. That's important to all of us. We're going to plow more money into that, which is plowing more money into the neighborhoods. That's important to you. That's important to us, too.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Poole.
I acknowledge that our income tax is not as high as it is in some places. I would suggest that comparing our income tax to other communities is something that you can do, but I don't feel that it amounts to much in terms of deciding whether or not our income tax is high enough, low enough, or whatever. We really need to talk about what's the quality of life in those communities, quality of life in our communities, and what do we do with the income tax. We've raised the income tax by 0.25%. We chose to do that as a community, and the community did expect things to be better for them, and roads was a big issue that everyone was concerned with. There's more to it than that. We had gone through a period of time where we did not spend a lot of money on upkeep of much of anything in the community, and I think we raised our taxes because we want our quality of life to be better. And the concerns that we're having, and it's a small group perhaps that is vocal about this, but the concept here is we gave you the money expecting one thing. We're not seeing enough of what we change in our lives, and the money seems to be spent and not on things that are improving our lives significantly. Much of this is you talk about the future. We're not sure whose future you're talking about. I do agree. Come spring, summer, we'll decide, and the community should come together and decide whether or not the $20 million or $18 million we have on Jackson Street Pier and down on Shoreline Drive, if it was worth it. We will have spent it, we'll be in debt for it, and we'll have to pay for it. But going forward, making decisions about maybe we ought to direct a little more money toward getting people to move here, and that's the concept about this tax. Our tax is well below many others. Do you see people flocking to move here? And that's really what we're looking, what for me, I think is the most important. People moving into this community so that we can keep the city updated without having to raise our taxes because more people are contributing. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Harris.
I just have a comment, about the Jackson Street Pier and whether or not, many think it's worth it or not. And, speaking in terms of value, I don't think the value of the Jackson Street Pier can be determined in a year, 2 or 3. I think it's something that will continue to increase in value over time and not necessarily monetarily, but as the family spend time there and they begin to create those memories, I think that's where the real value lies. So, yes.
Thank you, Commissioner Harris. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.